Welcome to the Building Materials Sales and Marketing Podcast, presented by Mark Mitchell, a sales and marketing consultant who specializes in helping building materials companies overcome difficult sales problems. Mark is the author of the book Building Materials Channel Marketing and a frequent speaker at industry events.
Hello, this is Mark Mitchell from Wizard Strategy. Thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Today I want to talk about Warren Buffett and his most recent shareholder letter. His letters are famous, how he puts them out to his shareholders and the way that he writes just so basic, common sense, easy to understand. There's always great wisdom and observations that you can gain from reading his letters. It's particularly of interest to me this year because I thought that one of the companies that he owns, Mytech, at the Builder Show recently, I thought did the best job of any building material company recognizing the changing needs of the marketplace. So when I looked at, he also owns Clayton Homes and Johns Manville. He owns a number of building material companies. And one of the things that he, first of all, talks about that's a great lesson is to, make sure that you're looking at the forest for the trees. And he talks about how easy it is to get drawn into past the forest, to the trees, to the saplings, to the twigs, to the weeds, and be too focused on minutia. And how when he stays focused on looking at the big picture, the forest for the trees, how much clearer the view is. And yes, he knows there's going to be certain trees in the forest that are going to die, and there's going to be certain trees that are going to flourish. But he's looking at the big picture overall of what's going on, we'll say, in the building construction marketplace. I think he has 5 forests, and one of them is related to construction and building materials. When he looks at that forest, he's looking at the big picture, all the disruption, all the changes in customers, the changes in demand, the changes in how buildings are built and so forth, and keeping an eye on that big picture, where too often we're looking at the small individual tree within the forest, the one that is either failing, that's probably going to die, and maybe we're putting an undue amount of attention into trying to keep it alive, or the one that has a sudden burst of growth, and then we're not looking at the other trees in our forest. And I see that so often when I work with building material companies. We all suffer this issue where we're just so close to our own situation that it's hard to get back and see the big picture. And that's one of the things that we all need help with that. Probably one of the biggest benefits that I provide in working with a company is I can see the forest for the trees because I'm not so close to where they are. I even have a couple of consultants who consult with me, who I regularly check in with, have them look over my shoulder and give me a reality check on what's going on in the world. So we all need that. So whether you're a salesperson, whether you're the company leader, marketing person, get yourself to step back and make sure you're looking at the forest and not just lost in the trees as much as possible. And sometimes it's really hard to get back away far enough to see it. And it helps to have some sort of outside counsel or advice or trusted advisor. One easy way to do it is just to have regular communications with customers in a way that you're trying to literally get them to challenge your thinking. Like, am I crazy to think that builders would want this? And have the builder tell you is a great way to a reality check to keep yourself looking at, if you will, the forest for the trees. The other part that Warren talked about was he is, probably the biggest fan for America and the American way, American economy, capitalism, the American way of doing business that I think there is. And he calls it like when you're doing business here, that you have a favorable tailwind. Yes, there are many day-to-day things that can come up, or regional things or economic things that can seem to be a setback. But when he looks at the long picture, like when he first invested in a stock and what happened to that, and if he had not done that, if he'd not stuck it out through tough times, if he'd put his money into gold or something else, he just looks at that once again, the forest for the trees, the big picture of how well his money has done and other people's money has also done that have taken advantage of everything that the American market has to offer. Now, that got me thinking about this idea of tailwinds versus headwinds. And I think about every time I'm on a plane where the pilot will frequently get on and say, oh, we're going to arrive early. We had a very favorable tailwind. Or we're going to be delayed. We ran into some stronger than anticipated headwinds. And so it made me start to think about, as Warren Buffett talks about, just the American market has favorable tailwinds for businesses. It made me think about overall that may be the case, like the big jet stream, but day to day and market to market and so forth, those headwinds and tailwinds change, much like the flight from New York to Los Angeles. The headwinds and tailwinds will be changing, and the pilots will be trying to find, how do I find a favorable tailwind and how do I avoid an unfavorable headwind? And it seems to me like most building material companies, they start out and they have a new idea, a new product. They are a company, somehow started out and got going. They probably had some tailwind helping them. And as they move forward and as things change, there are periods where they have a tailwind. There's periods maybe where there's really no wind. And then there's periods where there's a headwind. And it seems to me that too often they just stick with the same course of action that they were using when they had a favorable tailwind when they start to face a headwind. So if the market for their product is changing, if the way their customers want to do business is changing, if they have a new lower cost competitor, all of those things to me are headwinds, and that make you have to work harder to get the same level of success or sales growth. Think about, if you just step back, I see so many times when I work with a company that if they would just make a course correction, I would call it, not a big, massive change, but a course correction, it's amazing how they move from facing a headwind to having a tailwind, making their life a little bit easier. But so often, once again, when you can't see the forest for the trees, when you aren't stepping back to look at the forest for the trees, you keep trying to do the same thing better and better, whether you have a tailwind behind you or a headwind facing you. And when you have a tailwind behind you, which really, I'll say, means a favorable market condition, maybe your competitor made a mistake, screwed up, maybe for some reason your customers really like you, all of a sudden it's easy to make the mistake to think that you're doing something smart, when really maybe something outside of your control changed to create a tailwind, much like a pilot runs into a tailwind. And then along comes a headwind, and you just kind of put your head down and just decide to work harder, as opposed to step back and say, okay, wait a minute, should we make a slight course correction here? Because if we moved over here, just change this, we'd possibly pick up a tailwind instead of be facing a headwind. So that was just an interesting thought that came to my mind after reading his letter. And also when I see that the amount of change and disruption that we're facing today, whether it is labor shortages, the drive toward panelized modular offsite construction, the drive to reduce waste and inefficiency, the drive to, let's say, buy direct, the drive to questioning the value that each person and company brings to the equation, how people get information, how they make decisions. All of these things are changing, which means all of these things can either be for you a headwind that you have to fight or work harder against, or by making a few course corrections, all of a sudden it becomes a tailwind that makes you move along faster with less effort. So I invite you just to stop and think about, are you facing headwinds or tailwinds? And if you're facing headwinds, can you find a way to step back, get a bigger picture view, a forest for the trees view of your business and the market, and see where perhaps you could make some course corrections that could vary in size, but many times it's not like you're going in a whole different business to make that kind of a course correction, to move back into where you have a tailwind supporting your growth. The other area that he specifically brought up that relates to a tailwind, and that was for an old white guy, he really gets this, and that is how all companies, not just building material companies, but all companies are behind when it comes to the digital world or technology world. And he used the example of something like only 11% of Fortune 500 companies have a technology person on their leadership team. So it's not just building material companies. He sees this across the board. So as the world moves more toward digital, and digital could mean more reliance on your website than on meeting with your salespeople. Digital could mean making it easier for people to get a price on your product. It could be making it easier to track a shipment. It could be making better use of BIM technology. There's many, many different ways to do that in this big digital world to improve your digital performance. But he sees that as an unnecessary headwind, a headwind that companies they could choose to, if you will, they're self-imposing this headwind. It's not just something the market's serving up to them. It's sitting there for them to take advantage of, make better use of. It could be something like a better CRM program, marketing automation, content marketing. Across the board, there's many different ways, because the way that your customers are designing buildings today, the way they are deciding which products will be used, the way they're sourcing them, and the way the buildings are being built are all being dramatically affected by technology and the digital world. So there's an area that I would encourage you to continue to push forward on and invest more in, because I find that many times your customers, the building material company's customers, the architect, the builder, the contractor, for example, are already ahead of the building material company when it comes to making decisions online or using other digital tools. It's easy to still think about there are still many, many contractors, particularly in the building materials industry, that are still using fax machines. So you can look at that case and make a judgment that they really aren't very advanced. But actually, those people are more the exception than the rule today. So an area to turn from a headwind into a tailwind to support you is to continue the transition from the ways that you've always done things in the past in sales and marketing and customer service and operations, and move them into the digital world. Take advantage of technology to not only improve your efficiency, lower your costs, but also do it with the goal of making it easier for the customer to do business with you, or making it easier for the customer to be successful because of the technology or digital interactions that they can make with you. So I think that, those are the big things I took away from the letter this year. First of all, was to stay focused, try really hard. I mean, it's hard to stay focused on this, to try really hard to look at the big picture, to not lose sight of the forest for the trees, and realize sometimes you may need to get some outside help to do that. And the second one is to think about that idea of headwinds and tailwinds. And are there some headwinds that you're facing that are causing you to have to work harder, expend more resources, spend more money in order to achieve your goals, that are caused perhaps by some headwinds from changes in the marketplace, where if you could make some course corrections, you might find a tailwind, and life gets just a little bit easier. When life's a little bit easier, it's a lot easier to keep your eye on the forest, where if you're fighting a headwind, you're more likely to have your head looking at an individual tree once again. So I really got a lot out of this letter, as I do every year. I like his just plain language, and I like his just faith in business, and his just common sense approach to how to do a better job. So I hope this has given you some things to think about. And if I can help you or your company to get a better view of the forest for the trees in your market, or to turn a headwind into a tailwind, that's what I do. So please contact me. I'd love to discuss with you your situation. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this podcast from Mark Mitchell on building materials, sales, and marketing. We hope he gave you some fresh perspectives on how to grow your sales, and will listen to future episodes.